Lecture 5, Developing Your Staff Resources. Hi, this is Dr. Davis, and welcome to our 5th lecture and our module that deals with professional development. In this week's module, we're going to look at how the principal serves as a developer of the staff, how that you can create a program of ongoing professional learning for your staff that doesn't necessarily depend on what the district does or what conferences your teachers want to go to, like the mega conference in the summer. That you can create a program of learning that goes throughout the year. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't make these other events and conferences unnecessary, but you're going to find that this is a sustained approach, and I think it's going to have lasting benefits. So let's take a look at how we develop our staff. The concept of professional development has changed a little bit over the years. Originally, it was a process or an activity that was designed to improve skills, attitudes, and understandings, or performance. But now the definition seems to include not only improving, but maintaining the skills that the teachers have. And it's a common idea that if we don't use information, after a while we'll forget it. What we have not implemented into our classroom will not be of benefit to us. Just as our human bodies require us to move and use the muscles, otherwise they atrophy. And in an intellectual sense, knowledge that we don't use, we tend to lose. We forget it. And therefore, what professional development has become is an instrument that can help us maintain that professional knowledge, that professional excellence in the classroom. Change is one of those ideas, I call it a universal constant, that is something that's always going to be around, is one of those forces that drives a lot of professional development. And it comes in two broad categories. The first category is a technological change, and typically that kind of change revolves around new curriculum, new ways of instructing, maybe new programs or redesigned programs, and student management, how we have to manage the classroom that we're given. The other type of change is a structural change, and that definitely includes duties and how duties change over the years. Power and authority allocation. So new jobs are created, and there's a new amount of power or authority that goes with those. As well as people are empowered to do certain jobs that they didn't do before. Maybe they're department chair and they were just a classroom teacher. And of course, there's the ever-present rewards and responsibilities. Oftentimes people are given new responsibilities that they didn't have before. So that can require, or at least impact, professional development and encourage staff development to take place. So change is the driving force in most professional development. It's not that we're going to a conference because we always go to a conference, but now more people are going to conferences because they need to learn how to implement a new curriculum. And we see a lot of conferences that are devoted just to those kinds of technological changes. And in some cases, I've got a new assignment, and so I'm going to go to a conference and learn more about it. I remember when I first became department chair at the university many years ago, I was sent off to a conference in Texas, I believe, and it was for department chairs, and they had a whole segment of this conference just on, you're a new department chair, so here's what you need to know to be a department chair. And so you see a little bit of that taking place. Unfortunately, not enough, because many people are given jobs, but they're not given adequate training on how to do the job, and so they don't carry out their responsibilities as effectively and efficiently as they should. So change is our force that seems to be driving a lot of professional development. So on slide number 4, you see an example of how change can bring up the need for professional development. Here's an example of decreased enrollment. This is a structural change that has a technological impact, where we see increased class sizes, so we're buying more curriculum. We have a loss of teaching units, or possibly even school consolidation, which brings a whole range of structural changes within the school, new responsibilities, people taking on responsibilities that they didn't have before. So there are some technological changes there for certain. Here's an example of a technological change. Let's say your school goes to Chromebook, and every student gets one. And so how does that technological change create a structural change? And it may be involving scheduling of classes. It may mean larger classes, where because of the technology that comes with the Chromebook, we're going to do more online. So we might use Access as a way to get to classes that we wouldn't normally be able to offer because we don't have the teaching units. So even technological changes can have structural changes as again, the increased size of classes, possibly a redistribution of duties and assignments. So because change is prevalent, technological and structural, then we must provide some development to accommodate the change. If we want our teachers to be effective with this new change, we've got to prepare them. And this is an area where we typically do a rather poor job. Just as with the example of Chromebooks in the classroom, many teachers are provided with some hardware support when it comes to the Chromebooks, but they aren't provided the software support. So they're not given the training on how to use the Chromebook in the classroom. They're not given the educational support that goes with it. How do I infuse this new technology into my instruction? Now, I think one of the school districts that has done a great job of that with their Chromebook initiative is probably Ozark City, because they've had 2 or 3 years of professional development that not only talked about the hardware and the software, but also talked about, so how do we use this as we teach? Now, that's a shining example, but it's not the general rule. Many times technology is brought into the school, and there's precious little training that goes on how it's to be used. And I think of other schools where they've got the Chromebooks, but it's only used in isolation. It's not used with any of the other classes. And so to me, I think we've got this great resource that we're relegating to just a class they go to once a week or twice a week, and they use the Chromebooks. Oh, wow. But how does that impact the teaching of social studies? How are we using it with our math classes? So again, we provide development to accommodate the change. And if we don't, then we're not going to be as effective with that change as we need to be. And now the big question, what does effective professional development look like? And I've come up with a list of adjectives to describe it. First of all, it is collaborative. We're talking about adult learners. And adult learners like to work together in groups, and they want to see the results of their learning. They want to see observable change. So training needs to be group-oriented, not individual training. That doesn't mean all training, but we need to make sure that we're finding ways for teachers and our adults to work together on the training. And mainly that's because they can help each other. There are some people who are more comfortable with technology than others, so if they're doing technology training, it's nice to have someone who can say, no, you need to do this first or that, and kind of have a partner. The second way to describe effective professional development is that it needs to be relevant. We've got to tie it to what they're doing in the classroom right now. Now, you can tell them about things that are coming in the future, but if it's not here right now and they don't have to do it right now, they won't implement what they're learning, so it's a waste of time. That's why professional development needs to be timely. It needs to be relevant to what's going on right now, and then you'll see a bigger benefit from it. Third is that we're modeling. Professional development requires them to demonstrate how what they're learning, and that they understand how to use the strategies. So we not only want them to hear the strategy, but we want them to practice it. We want them to see it being done. So it's kind of I hear, I see, I do. And that way we get all of the senses involved. Number 4 is that professional development is balanced. And what we're looking at here is that it's an equal presentation of something called inside and outside knowledge. And inside knowledge is the kind of knowledge that comes from things that we observe in our school. We observe a teacher who's doing something rather unique, and it's like, wow, I could use that in my classroom. And so I go observe that teacher teaching that particular strategy or using that particular strategy or that display in the classroom. And then conversations. Sitting around the lunch table saying, well, I had a great lesson today. Well, what did you do? I did this. And you say, yeah, that is a very exciting thing to do. Maybe I should try that in my classroom. That's inside knowledge. Then, of course, the outside knowledge is what I call the hired gun knowledge. This is the knowledge that comes from a hired consultant who brings in information that's not readily available within the school. So it's got to be balanced between both. Just having outsiders come in is not the way to go, as much as it is just a resort to doing all the training yourself. And when I was a school leader, I did a lot of professional development for my staff. I felt like I had maybe more flexibility, that I could be reading things and then sharing things with them that I had read. And so I wanted to take on that role of being a part of the training of the faculty, but I also knew that I could not be the only source. That's why we went to conferences as a group during the summer, or why we would have special guest speakers come in. And then finally, if we're going to have effective professional development, the principal has to support it 110%. And that means that when professional development is taking place, if the principal isn't conducting it, then he or she needs to be in the room while it's conducted. The presence of the principal in that meeting shows that they support what's going on. So whenever you have professional development going on in your building, you as a leader need to take time to sit in there and pay attention to that outside consultant, or if it's inside knowledge where you've got a teacher doing it, then you need to be there to support it, because that will add your reputation behind it, your authority behind that professional development, and it will be received as, wow, this is more if the principal is going to sit here and listen to it. So definitely the principal has to be a key player in all professional development that goes on in the school. Some other ideas that support effective professional development is the feedback. That we create opportunities for us to practice a strategy and then get feedback from somebody who knows how to do it. So it's like the peer coach who presents the strategy. You watch. That's where the I hear, I see, and then I go do the strategy, and the peer coach watches me do it and then gives me feedback. Well, that's very good, but if you tried this, this, and this, it would even be better. So second, that other idea of effective professional development has a component where there's opportunity for me to practice and get feedback. And the other aspect of effective professional development is the accountability. There's certainly a pressure that we no longer can send all of our faculty to conferences, so we really have to pick and choose the conferences that we do send them to. And then in order to maximize the benefit of that training is the teacher comes back and trains the staff. So it's a train the trainer conference, and then you come back and train the staff, or at least share the material that you've learned. And in many schools, that's what's happening, is in order to go to a conference, you must agree to come back and demonstrate what you learn. You have to go to sessions and And if you identify the sessions in advance that they're supposed to go to and report back on, it even adds to the benefit of the training, not only for the teacher, but for the teachers back home. This final point on effective professional development that deals with ease of adoption just covers a general idea that the factors that will impact your professional development program the most are going to be how complex you make it, the amount of effort that's required to participate in it, and the time in which you offer the training. These are fundamental factors that will derail even the best professional development offered in a school. And we're going to take a look at those here in just a second. Here's the general rule that I want you to keep in mind. If it's too complex, requires a very large effort on the part of the participant, and if it's time consuming, the implementation is more likely to fail. And that's simply just understanding human nature. Teachers, while they're intelligent people, don't seem to have a penchant for complexity. They like things that are simple. They like things that are kind of straightforward. What is it that's involved here? So I encourage you, as you're creating professional development opportunities for your staff, that you keep them simple. Don't present 50 topics. Present one topic at a time, and one strategy, and one opportunity to observe. Also, effort. If they have to do a lot, where you have to read a book beforehand and you have to watch these video series beforehand, generally they're not going to do it because their time is so precious to them. The other thing, of course, does deal with time and how time-consuming it is. People only have a certain amount of time in their daily schedule. So, keep it basic. The principle to use is keep it simple and short. The KISS principle, K-I-S-S. Keep it short and simple. And I think you'll see a better impact from your professional development. Nowadays, what drives professional development in addition to change is data. Data is our driving force for pretty much everything that we do in the schools, and it makes sense as to why it is. Most districts now plan their professional development around the data that they glean from the tests that are conducted on a quarterly basis or an annual basis even. And the whole point of the professional development is to provide teachers with strategies that, if implemented, will increase student learning and achievement in that area, which is a weakness that has been brought out by the test or the instrument that was used. So what happens with this then is we're going to spend as little money as we can so that we can shore up those weak skills or to acquire skills that will have a great impact on student achievement. And that, to me, makes the most sense. Why waste a lot of money on strategies that are not going to increase student achievement, or they're not going to help you in areas of weakness? Now, I'm all in favor of professional development for professional development's sake, but with no budget for professional development or minimal budget for it, you need to look at what's going to increase your student achievement, because that's what your school's been measured by. And you don't want one of those failing grades where your school ends up with a C, which C is average, but who wants to be average nowadays? Well, nobody does, because again, that ends up in the newspaper, and you don't want your name associated with a mediocre school. So data drives our professional development today. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't also offer opportunities for just inspiration. These are good strategies to have that might help you in the future. We have to kind of do a combination now of the professional development that will shore up weaknesses, as well as professional development that will inspire us as professionals. Another big question that comes out from developing professional development is when. Typically we do a lot of it right after school, and sometimes we do it on teacher work days, or maybe even in the summer. But here's the thing that comes to mind. We have basically 4 times that we can offer professional development. That's during their work time. which means we have to provide some kind of substitute for them. Secondly, it's during release time. In other words, the students aren't present to do it. Another time might be a stipend where we're hiring subs for all the teachers or a department's worth of teachers and then releasing that portion of the faculty for training. Or we do it on their personal time. Now, what we find is that if we use stipend time or release time or salaried work time, it's costly because we're having to provide substitutes, or except the release time. We're having to provide substitutes, or we're having to rearrange the schedule. It is feasible to do it then, and because we've already got them working anyway. The personal time is the least costly because we're not paying them for that time, but it's also the least feasible because people are wanting to get home. They've worked their 8 hours. They're ready to go home. They're not interested in listening. Probably your best option is on a teacher workday when there are no students present and you're not providing substitutes, when they have to work anyway. And that's what a lot of schools are doing, is that's when they're putting their professional on. But the challenge then comes back to how do we provide sustained, high-quality professional development, as No Child Left Behind used to say, but it's still the trend today. How do we provide that high-quality, sustainable professional development? We can't just do it on days when it's just a teacher work day. It has to be throughout the school year. And so this is the dilemma that many principals are in. Now, what I really would want to do with staff development is, yes, I would use my release days, but then I would also create individual learning assignments where they could do it on their own and would be encouraged to do it on their own, but if not, they could certainly use a planning period to work on a module. Much like you're spending a week doing a module here, you could see a module created that, they might take 2 weeks to do, and they could do it during their planning periods, and you schedule it out so that they do it during a planning period. But this means then you're not scheduling meetings. And what's happening a lot today is that as teachers' planning periods are disappearing because they're being filled with meetings and things like that. So you have to kind of balance it. But I would think that if you were to provide them with a book and say, I want you to read this, and we're going to meet during a faculty meeting, we're going to discuss this book, or we're going to meet during department meetings and then discuss the book and look at how we can implement this book into our classroom. So this is really a dilemma for a lot of school leaders as to how to schedule the professional development. And I think you're going to have to do it with a combination of release time and planning period time and some after school during faculty meetings. You're going to have an opportunity as one of the assignments to design some professional development. So there are 3 things I want you to consider as you're designing that little professional unit that you'll be developing for this class. First of all is the structure and the content. Is it going to be a workshop? Is it going to be a small group? Is it going to be an individual activity? And I want you to think about that, because we do say you have to put together a PowerPoint presentation, but there's no reason why that PowerPoint presentation couldn't be an individual presentation. Instead of getting everybody together, sending out the PowerPoint presentation and saying, here's what I need you to do. That would be an idea for you to put together with your own presentation. Instead of making it a group activity, make it an individual. Now, you'd have to update some of the materials so that it could be done as an individual. And there would have to be some accountability measure to make sure that they did it. So in other words, they would have to not only watch the presentation, but they would have to produce some artifact as a result of it. Now, the second factor to consider is the objectives. What kind of change are you looking for? Are you changing knowledge, behavior, or attitude of this person? What kind of change do you hope to make? What are the objectives of your training? Identify those. And because those objectives are going to be your measures later on when you look at evaluating professional development, is looking at did we meet those objectives? The third factor to consider is the content. What topics will you cover as a part of those objectives and this professional development? So think about what you would present your lesson on. What is it that teachers need to know right now? One of the hot topics that are out there. Lastly is the buy-in. You've got to factor in how are you going to get the teachers to support this professional development experience. Most teachers are skeptical about professional development. They see it as a waste of time. And I'm sorry to say that most professional development is a waste of time because it's poorly constructed. It's stuff that people could do better if they just did it on their own rather than attend a meeting. And I hate to say this too, but I'm not a big fan of a lot of conferences for that same reason, because the workshops are so poorly put together. The presentations are poorly done, and I consider it a waste of time. So there's a lot of negativity associated with professional development. You know, it may have gotten a bad reputation just from people not doing it well. But just remember that you're going to have to get the buy-in. You're going to have to get the teachers excited about this training. And that will be on you, the principal. That's where your support comes in. You're going to have to really entice them to say, yeah, I'm going to do this training. And open their hearts and their minds to what they're supposed to learn from it. A question that you'll need to consider as you develop your little professional development experience is, how are you going to deliver the content? Is it going to be a video like what you're seeing here today? And that's not a bad way to do it. In other words, you create a narrated PowerPoint presentation and you send that out to the teachers and they watch it when they want to watch it. Good idea. That way it's always out there. And then new teachers that come, they can watch the recording. Maybe not as engaging as if you were in a classroom and you could discuss what you were hearing, but in today's busy lives of teachers, many of them would prefer you just to give them the presentation, they'll watch it, and then have a meeting afterwards where they can do the engagement. And that probably is the best way to do it. It's kind of that flipped classroom way of doing it. In other words, that you send the teaching instruction home, they do that at home, and then they come to class and they practice it. So you could do a flipped type of version of professional development. But when you're delivering content to adults, these are things you have to keep in mind. Number one, adults want to know, why does this strategy work? How do we know? What's the research tell us about it? They're skeptical about all these ideas that have been thrown at them over the years, and so they're going to want to know what makes this tick. How do I know that this is really the best way to teach reading, or whatever the topic is? There needs to be a demonstration. So yeah, let me see you do it first. I want to see if it works, and if you can do it, then I'm going to be more confident that it'll work for me. Then another aspect is now I've seen you do it. I want to try it and see if it works for me. Is it as easy to implement as you say? Because anything that isn't, you don't get to buy in. Then finally, I want you to watch me as I do it and give me pointers to how I can make my implementation even better. That's the feedback that comes as a part of observation. So this content delivery is important to how you're going to present your professional development to the teachers that you're going to do. On a previous slide, we talked about when should we do professional development. And on this slide, we're going to look at how long we should do professional development. So the day of the one-day wonder, one-shot wonder, they're a thing of the past, and it's mainly because from what we've learned from our research is that a one-day workshop with no follow-up does not change people's behavior. They don't have enough information to implement it in a one-shot wonder. And we see still organizations that produce these one-day workshops. And then you're supposed to go back and implement this incredibly complex strategy. So those are gone, thankfully, because they just don't work. What we are seeing are our best results from these series of workshops that are no longer than 3 hours. And actually, I would say it's even better if they're no longer than an hour in length, and they're spaced out over a period of months, because this allows for not only the training, but the conversations about the training to take place over the course of months, so that after the training, teachers can converse about what they learned. And yeah, I tried that, but I'm really having a problem. I don't think I'm implementing it right. Would you come look at what I'm doing? Also, what happens is that it allows us to break these big topics down into small pieces. Teachers can assimilate the smaller pieces of material. Reflection, we can't forget that. People need to reflect on their practice. They need to reflect on these principles in order to really inculcate them into how they teach. And then, of course, we need the time for implementation. Kind of this, I go to a workshop and I'll implement it tomorrow kind of a thing just doesn't work. People need time to see how to put it into their lesson plans and make it a part of what they do, because they've been doing the same thing for many years, and now you're asking them to do something completely different. So we want them to have time for implementation and then to get some kind of feedback. So duration is an important question, not only the time of day to offer it, but how long should this training be. And as I've said, I think an hour, maybe 2 hours at the most is about as much of their attention span as you're going to be able to get. Another question that comes to mind is, do we go for depth or do we go for breadth? So one option involves the intensive training where you bring a few staff members together, but you're giving them a deep chunk of material and it's very focused. It's an inch wide, but it's a mile deep. And they're getting a lot of in-depth knowledge. But you really only can do that with a few staff. The other option is less intensive, a little broader, maybe a mile wide and only an inch deep. So you got two options. I think that the best is going to be probably the less intensive model. You have a greater amount of your staff that are exposed to the strategy, and so go for the breadth, the wider audience. Any presentation, professional development experience, it's worth its weight in gold if you evaluate it. If you don't evaluate it, you might as well not even do it. How do you know if it's effective? Yes, you can survey your participants, but what happens in most surveys like that, and I do enough of these workshops, is that the ratings are all agree to strongly agree. No matter what the element is, they agree or strongly agree. No one ever gives you, or very few, give you the negative. And then I don't want negative. I'm saying not that I want negative. But in other words, most of these people who are doing a survey, they're doing it after the training is complete. They just want to go home, and they're going to tell you what they think you want to hear. So I think that you need to look at ways to get better evaluation material. And that is to tailor your evaluation to the objectives that you set forth and use some measurable objectives. So how do we know how much was learned? Well, we observe the implementation. Who's doing it? And if they're not doing it, why not? And that's going to give you a better measuring stick as to was this an effective training than just some kind of survey that you did at the end of the training. Another idea would be to create an experimental research, an action research project that looks at the implementation of the strategy, and therefore you use that as your measure of effectiveness of the training. But the key here is to definitely spend time to evaluate, and that should be a first area to think about when you're designing your model of professional development for this class. How are you going to evaluate? What will you do? I'm telling you, don't waste your time with participant surveys, because they really are not going to do you very much good. I think I would do more of observe the implementation of the strategy, who's doing it, and how effectively are they doing it. We can't talk about staff development without talking for just a brief moment on your own professional development. Many principals, and there is a growing concern among superintendents that many principals are not continuing their own professional development. Yes, they may go to the mega conference, but beyond that, you don't see them reading journals. You don't see them engaging other administrators in increasing their learning. Oh yeah, they went to a master's program, but that's not the end-all that they need in learning. That's just the starting point. So why don't they do the training? Well, of course, just like anybody, they're too busy. They can't be away from school. They're already away from school more than they would like to be because they're at meetings from central office. Another reason is that many principals say, I'm focusing on training my own staff and their development. I don't have time for my own if I'm working on theirs. And then, of course, lastly, it goes along with the one before, which is they just don't want to leave their building because they know that there are problems, and if they're not there, who's going to handle them? Here's where this all kind of comes together for me. If you're not continuing your own learning, how are you going to be of any help to teachers to continue theirs? That's a bigger question, isn't it? I can only take them as far as I'm willing to go and no further. So if I want my staff to be highly effective in their job as teachers, I need to make sure that I'm providing them with high quality staff development, which means I need to maintain my own, not the do as I say, not as I do adage. But I'm going to lead by example and show that I'm maintaining my professional development, and you need to maintain your own, and here's a resource I'm going to provide for you. There are some options other than going to conferences that will help. Certainly the leadership centers are springing up all over the country, and these are places where you get streaming videos, you're collaborating with other school leaders. They're just all over. You can find them, just search them online. Certainly small group activities between the principals within the district can be a way to maintain your own professional learning. And school districts are often doing this for the principals. They're getting them together and they assign them to a group, and they study a particular topic and report back to the larger group of principals. Of course, the ever-present book club is a way to do that. You read a book together and then you discuss it, one night a month or 2 nights a month, whatever the schedule is. Then there is a real encouragement for the development of individual plans, and then marking those off as complete as you complete them. And so some school districts do a lot with the thing that you've already worked with, which is educational impact. And they use that as professional development, and they can monitor your progress. So some school districts use that as part of the evaluation piece of their school leaders, as well as the professional development. So you can create individual plans where each principal is doing their own thing, and then you're measuring the effectiveness of that plan by setting objectives of things that they have to do as a part of the training. So there are some options out there that can be used to help you maintain your professional learning. Now what follows are just a few ideas of ways that you can maintain learning through professional organizations, conferences, and journals and books. So here on this slide, number 19, are some of the professional associations that I would encourage you to look into joining. You have ASCD, which is the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development, National Education Association. You've got the American Education Research Association, Phi Delta Kappa, and then the AASA, which is the American Association of School Administrators, which is predominantly superintendents, but they have some good things on their website and in their journal. So participating with these organizations, there are just a plethora of professional development experiences that would be associated with them, not to mention journals, which I'll talk about here in a minute. Now, there are just 3 here, but there are plenty more that you could attend besides these 3. But I do like the Future of Education Technology. I've told others about it. It really is a good conference. Even as an administrator, you would learn a lot of great resources there. Then, of course, ASCD has their big conference, and the dates are March 16 through 18, 2019 in Chicago. FETC's is in Orlando, June 27th through the 30th of 19. And then Mega Conference, of course, this year is July 8th through 13. It's down in Mobile. So these are just 3, and like I said, there are many, many more. I would encourage you, as a part of your professional development plan, to include one conference for yourself each year, just as a way to get out and talk with other administrators from around the country. You just get a broader picture of what's going on in education by talking to people from all over, and you begin to realize that the same problems you're having, they're having, but they may have some ways to solve it that you haven't even thought about. So here are just a few conferences, way more besides this. I've come up with about 6 books that I think you ought to read or make part of your reading library. Some are old, some are new. This first one is by Yang Zhao. He's just a great author. I really like his work. His current book is Reach for Greatness, Personalizing Education for All Children. The premise of his book is, why should only certain kids get an individual education plan? Why can't all kids have it? And he says with the technology, it's actually possible to do that. And he's from China, lives in Michigan now. I think he's at the University of Michigan, been there for many years, but came out of China, and he makes the point that the American system of education is becoming more like the Chinese system, the way it used to be, and the current Chinese system is more like the way the American system used to be. So again, a great book to read. Add that to your library. A profound book on education reform and what's going on in education is Tinkering Towards Utopia by David Tyack and Larry Cuban. An old book. I read it probably 20 years ago, and I still go back and refer to that book from time to time. Just again, another awesome book, one to add to that old library. It's a short book, maybe 150 pages. You could read it in a weekend. This book here by Jim Collins, Good to Great, talks about what separates good organizations from great organizations. And he is one that says, and now this is a business book, but it has applications for schools. And he is one who could say that every school could be a great school if the leadership would make the effort to make it so. Another book to read is Start With Why. This is one that I'm currently reading myself. How Great Leaders Inspire Everyone to Take Action. And so I'm not going to got all the way through the book. It's by Simon Sinek, a book that so far I'm liking and would encourage you to add to your library, your professional library, and read when you have a chance. Of course, the classic 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, an excellent book, and one that you should read. Every leader needs to read this, and it will make you an effective leader. And then the final book by James C. Hunter, The Servant, a simple story about the essence of leadership. It's a life-changing book. If you don't want to be a great leader, don't read that book. Because if you read that book, it's going to change how you think about school leadership and leadership in general. It's one of those that I've read over the years and reread over the years, and I always learn something new every time I read it. So it's one of those to add to your shelf and get busy reading. These are just 6, and I can think of probably 10 more that should be on your must-read list. So here's just 6. And these would be ones to invest in. They're not that expensive. You get them from Barnes & Noble, Amazon.com, and get the paperback versions of them, and they would be good to have. Now, I realize that once you become a school principal or even assistant principal, you don't take the time to read the journals, and you probably don't even maintain subscriptions for them. But Phi Delta Kappa has a journal called Kappan, and it's definitely a well-written magazine. It tends to talk more about teaching, classroom-related issues, and school-related issues to a certain degree. Education Leadership is the premier journal for education and leadership. I would encourage you to have a membership. That's part of the ASCD membership, about $89 to $90 a year, something like that, for a membership at either of the organizations. And it would be worth it to you to take some money, join them, read those journals. It's a great professional development. As a matter of fact, Phi Delta Kappa has their own book club that you can join, and they'll send you 3 books a year, and you read them, and there are things to go along with those books. A website that I read periodically, I don't read it every week, but if I want to know what's going on in education in the United States, Education Week website, and I know they produced a journal, a newspaper, would be a good one to have. But I just read online what's going on. So, and I put the headline from this past week, which is poll, most teachers don't want to be armed, which is contrary to what we're hearing in some of the news media reports. So these are some journals and websites to look at. There are plenty more, but just examples. I encourage you to be a reader. You learn a lot by reading, and I would be one who would say so. I'm not a reader for enjoyment. I read because I need to. But if you are a reader for enjoyment, then definitely you should get these journals and then pass them around. And I've been doing that a lot, passing journals around to people and say, hey, here's a journal that might be interesting to you. Keep it, pass it on to somebody else. No sense in it collecting space in your office or at your school, so I pass them on to other people. But again, these are some websites and journals to look at. And this wraps up our lecture number 5 on staff development. Hopefully you've gained some nuggets of truth that you can apply as you're developing your professional development workshop experience as part of the class, and also as you become a school leader, that you take charge of the professional development within your school. And I think you're going to see that it's going to be beneficial to you. I hope you have a great rest of your week and look forward to seeing you online in class. Take care.